Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather tonight is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Innuit, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, of course, McNally Robinson itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Brewstertown. We are gathered here tonight with huge thanks to Roseway and Fernwood Publishing to celebrate the Winnipeg launch of Firekeeper, the fourth book by Katłįà. We have a treat in store for you. There will be a reading from this podium, and that'll be followed by a conversation hosted by Mylène Yannick Gamache, which will take place just over here to my left. After that, there'll be an opportunity for you in the audience to ask questions if you'd like. So when that comes about, I'll just walk through the crowd with this microphone. That is not a comment on your ability to project your voice. It just makes sure that those watching at home can hear the questions and prevents our host from having to repeat them. After that, I'll pop back up to this podium and I'll let you know how you can get a book signed. So this is the fourth book from acclaimed writer Katłįà and brings a Northern Indigenous perspective to the destructive effects of ongoing colonialism. Firekeeper is a coming-of-age tale that addresses intergenerational trauma by reclaiming culture, belonging, and identity. No less an authority than Angela Starrett, the author of Unbroken, has called it gripping, touching, and profound. We're so pleased to be celebrating this book here in collaboration with our good friends at the Winnipeg International Writers Festival, with whom we team up whenever we're particularly excited about a book. And Charlene Deal, the director of the festival, will be up to tell you a little bit more at the close of the event as well. Now, your host for this evening, Mylène Yannick Gamache, is a Franco-Métis assistant professor, cross-appointed in Indigenous Studies and Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Manitoba. Red River Métis by her mother line, with Katłįà relations in Saint-Pierre-Joli, Manitoba, and Beauchemin relations in Saint-Vital and Inlishin, Manitoba. She is a member of La Union Nationale Métis, Saint-Joseph de Manitoba, and an MMF citizen, and I apologize for my clumsy Anglo tongue. Her work has been published in Australian Feminist Studies, the Oxford Literary Review, Feminist Review, and English Studies in Canada. Our guest of honor this evening, Katłįà, is a member of the Yellowknives Dene First Nation from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. She is an articling lawyer with Makoosh Law and is working on a constitutional charter rights court challenge for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people for the right to adequate housing. In her memoir, Northern Wildfire, Katłįà speaks of desiring to keep fighting the good fight and make sure she sees a change in this world until the silenced voices can speak again. Through her writing and her advocacy, she is clearly striving to do just that. Please join me in welcoming Katłįà.
Wow, this is the best turnout. Thank you all so much for taking the time to come out this evening on Friday night and listen to me talk and ramble on. I just have to say I'm very thankful to be here on these lands, and I'm glad to be alive after what happened yesterday. Flying in, we had a pretty scary landing and we had to fly back up just moments from hitting the ground. And it really made me realize that I need to pay respects to the land that I'm on and be thankful that I'm here. And my grandma always used to teach me to put down tobacco or put down a quarter or a coin wherever I go. And I usually do that, but I've been sort of getting complacent about it. So yesterday I sure put a good chunk of money down on the ground. Yeah, so I am from Yellowknife and living in Vancouver, Victoria, working out of Vancouver and writing. And I guess this is actually my second public reading of Firekeeper. And I didn't think I was going to read tonight, but I'll read the first chapter just so that I don't really have to do a setup. And hopefully it'll make you want to read more. So chapter 1, the main character's name is Nyla. I used to live on the first floor of an old apartment building named after one of the first northern explorers who froze to death out on the ice, trying to make it to the top of the world. If only he knew how to make a fire to survive. It wasn't the cold that killed him and his men though, it was the scurvy. One of the only memories I've had of my grandfather was when he told me the crew became zombies after the boat sank. He said they looked like the walking dead, and no one would open their doors to them for fear they might catch a disease. It was just me and my mother stuffed into a tiny one-bedroom apartment back then. It feels so long ago now, like another life. My bedroom was in the storage room. I had no window, just a loud folding, sliding plastic door off the hallway. It looked more like one of those instruments. What are they called? An accordion, yes, a giant accordion. My mom and I had just moved from a smaller community further north, a town close to where the explorer's boat sunk. My grandfather said that the people in the community knew exactly where the boat was all along, but the researchers that came looking for it every summer never listened to the locals and made up their own search instead. When the boat was eventually found, it was because the researchers finally listened to the people in the community who led them straight to it. Somehow, they still found a way to publish their own names in the papers, taking all the credit for finding it. They left out the names of the locals, great hunters like my grandfather who pointed it out to them. Their names were too hard to pronounce, I guess. Now that I'm older, I've learned that that's usually how it works in the North. People from out of town come up, name and claim things for themselves and call it discovery, even though they're uncovering things that are not theirs to find or keep, things that have already been discovered. My mom and I moved to Coppertown, the capital of the North, after my dad put her in the hospital. She was medevaced to Coppertown because her arm was broken so badly that the bottom half of it disconnected from her elbow and hung low towards her knee. She told me he had been holding me hostage the night it happened, after he kicked my mom out of the house. With no shoes on in the dead of winter, she had to run to the neighbor's house for help. I don't remember, I was only a toddler at the time. Apparently, the only 2 police officers in our small northern community stood outside our rundown house in -50 for hours, trying to get him to come up with his hands up. The officers had to take turns warming up in their idling police car. I don't know why he did it, but my mom told me that when they finally got him to surrender, they found me watching cartoons and drinking my baby bottle full of pop, unaware of what was happening all around me. I'm just thankful my teeth didn't completely rot and fall out from the endless refills of sugary drinks. My mom got pins in her elbow and had her arm in a cast. When the cast finally came off, her arm was permanently stuck in a bent position because she refused to do her physiotherapy. Our small town didn't have a women's shelter at that time, even though it was much needed and still is. Domestic violence runs rampant in isolated places. When in Coppertown, we were put up in a shelter and the workers helped my mom find a job in an apartment where we lived until I eventually left home, if you want to call it that. After we moved into the apartment, when we left the shelter, my mom was never home long enough to spend time with me. I had the entire apartment to myself most of the time. Sick of staring at the wall in my small bedroom, it didn't take me long to find the crawl space underneath my bed. A place to leave the world behind, if only for a little while. I often hid in there away from my mother. She was an angry drunk and even angrier sober. I began to wonder if my father was as bad as she made him out to be. Maybe he'd been trying to protect me from her the night he broke her arm. Maybe she'd slipped and fallen on the ice. Had the police ever thought of that? I didn't want to believe he would hurt anyone. I wanted to have at least one parent to look up to. My mother told me that there's some, I should have made a little warning that there's some explicit things in this book. This chapter is probably the less or of the explicit, but yeah, just a disclaimer. My mother told me my dad had unalived himself. Blew himself to smithereens were her exact words, but it was an accident. I know it. I overheard her telling my auntie on the phone that he was trying to make homemade shatter, the equivalent of turning marijuana into glass through an extraction process in the bathroom of his mistress's small housing unit. He was using a propane torch and it exploded in his face. The newspaper said the entire structure of the house was ruined, the roof blown 10 feet high into the air, the doors blasted off the hinges. My mom drank the hard stuff. She sometimes drank for days. Random people came and went, some never left and just passed out where they were sitting in the living room. All I wanted was for everyone to leave, so one night I snuck into the kitchen and poured out what was left of the bottles and cans covering the kitchen counter. She'd still swig the leftovers even if there were a cigarette butt inside. She caught me in the act as the last of her precious booze drained into the sink. "Nyla," she screamed, and threw me into my room, where she tried smothering me with my own pillow. She was a hefty woman, so when she sat on my arms, I couldn't fight back. One of her friends happened to walk past my bedroom on her way to the bathroom and saw my feet kicking behind the half-open smoke-stained plastic door. She pulled my mom off me and out of my room while my mom cried and screamed, pointing her finger at me. "I wish you were never born," she hollered over and over in a pitiful rage until she was out of breath. She tried so hard to end my life that night, the life she created. When I discovered the crawl space, it became my escape. I would enter a different world down there underneath the 4-story apartment building held up by large cement cylinders. I had to duck my head and crouch under the pipes crossing in all directions like a highway. I crawled over sand and rock, feeling my way in the dark with only the small glow of my storage room lighting up the shadows. I never went far past the entrance of my crawl space. I was too afraid to venture into complete darkness, but learned that each unit of the ground floor had its own entrance into the crawl space. What might happen if I went into the wrong apartment? Maybe I would find a new mother, one that would hug me and never let me go. Despite my desire to get away from my mother, I would always return home through the hole in the floor and shut the cover before she found out I'd been down there. My secret could not be exposed. It was the only escape I had. It was the one thing I could not hand over to her. It was all I had that made me feel like I had some control over my own life. That's a joke. That was hard to read. It's very emotional for me. Sorry. And I'm tired. I'm a bit sleep deprived, so I get more emotional when I'm sleep deprived.
Thank you so much for reading. I have some notes. And I'm excited because my students are here from our class, from Indigenous Women Stories at the University of Manitoba. Some family here as well, which is really nice. Yeah. So this book initially reads like a dark kind of French 1990s feminine coming of age story that's set in Coppertown, which is Yellowknife, and it's a customary setting for some of your other books, which feels a little bit like it's partly like an industrialist deathscape, but also this deeply storied and living place in Denende, full of Indigenous knowledge. And there's all these moments in the book that are like incredibly anxiety-inducing and painful, lots of suspense, but then it's infused with a lot of love and care. And you mentioned the crawl space a little bit in the initial opening. So there's these like deeply spatialized moments, deeply embodied experiences of settler colonialism and racial capitalism. And it feels like it's this like fiery infection that affects everyone, like scathes everyone in its path. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your decision to write the story from Nyla's perspective.
Well, my decision was because of COVID. We were stuck inside and I was just bored and couldn't leave the house. It was like the stay-at-home time, which was really, really hard. So I'm like, I'm just gonna write. I mean, there's nothing else to do. So I was in sort of a dark place, I guess. And it came out in the writing and I had to step away from it a few times and come back to it and step away from it. But I wanted to write it because I needed to get my experiences out and I needed to get that just like out of me. Not all the experiences in the book are mine. Just let you know, I do have a really good mom. She's not abusive. She might have a bit of OCD, but she's not abusive. Yeah, when you build a character, well, for me anyway, the character sort of presents itself the more you write. So like I didn't plan Nyla. I planned me, and then she turned into Nyla. And then I didn't plan like the other characters either. It just sort of evolved as it went along.
One of the things that we did as a class is come up with questions for you. And one of the questions, I think we kind of got it wrong. So we read Land, Water, Sky, or excerpts of it. And we were thinking about it as Indigenous horror, partly because we had read Tuck Reid's The Glossary of Haunting, and so we were thinking in this context. And you were like, oh, I didn't set out to write Indigenous horror, but it's an age-old battle between good and evil, is what you had said. And so it struck me while I was reading this with this sort of tension that fire is as both destructive and generative, but also with the contrast between fire and water. So water often appears as the healing source, a soothing, calming source that can snuff out the fire that's raging within. So is there kind of a similar age-old battle that's playing out in this book, or a different one?
I think so. I think it's like sort of like a fight with yourself, kind of like trying to figure out like who you are. And Nyla felt like she was a bad person because of the way she was raised or the way she thought, and I guess you could say it's sort of that way. And then I wanted to play with fire and water because fire can be seen as destructive, and we tend to think of fire as being like not good, but fire is actually, it is good too. It has good purpose. And then vice versa with water, like water can destroy. So I was trying to play with those elements a little bit. And yeah, I think like it is what the reader, you know, there's some subtleties in there, and I think I just wanted to leave it up to the reader to decide for themselves what they kind of perceived. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, of course. I'm struck too by the title of the book. We talked a little bit about this at brunch this morning. Because Nyla is like a fire starter, really, you know, she's like a pyrotechnic junkie initially. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about the title.
Yeah. Well, she's a pyro, not an arsonist. So I learned through this process that there's a difference. She just resorts to fire to cope. Some people resort to drugs and alcohol. She resorted to fire. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Title.
Oh yeah, the title.
Yeah.
So the title I played around with quite a bit. I can't even remember some of the titles that I had wanted. Like I was actually going to name her native name for the book, and then Firekeeper was going to be one, like a play on words. But the publisher had more say than I did. So at the end of the day, they won, and they won because Firekeeper just sort of is more Googleable or whatever. Like if you Google it, it'll come up right away. And there's the Firekeeper's daughter, which I don't want to be compared to at all. There's going to be some confusion there probably with that book. So, but at the end of the day, I am happy with it because there is a part in the story where she is a firekeeper. She's actually tasked to be a firekeeper. And a lot of like my fiction comes from actual little snippets of reality. And my son was a firekeeper on the reserve once. And so I learned from that exactly that scene, even with the foamies on the ground and the teepee, like that's all real. The mice.
Yeah, they're in the acknowledgements, right, at the back of the book, you sort of share with us all of these different guides that brought this story into fruition. So
I don't have that good of an imagination.
Or maybe you could share a bit with us about some of those influences, or even about the process of writing. Like you've told us a little bit about how you're a binge writer. And you know, you write like 6 months is what this took about this project, and then the editing took a lot more time. Yeah. And some of your influences in your writing process.
I tend to just like get it all out on paper, and then I deal with the edits, and it's the editing part that takes forever. Like the edits took 2 years. And it's a lot of back and forth, and it's like reading the book like 50 times over. And then even when it's published and it was in my hands, I saw like 10 mistakes, and I was just like, oh, this is so cringy. This is horrible. Like, you know, the artist's suffrage. But yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, my writing process. I don't sit down at the computer and stare at like a page and have to write like a page a day. I write like when I'm called almost, like I can't just bring it out unless I'm actually inspired to do so, and then I will. And there's sometimes, like, I know poets do this a lot, like they'll just get something in their head and they're like, oh, I gotta write it down right away. So I do that sometimes. And then with this next book that I'm working on, Mother Earth is Our Elder, it's a nonfiction, so I'm going back to the very beginnings of when I started doing nonfiction, and that's a bit more difficult because I actually have to like do research, and I have to like do the footnotes and do the hard work, like kind of like journalists.
The fact checking. Yeah. You also go in community as well and gather stories that are gifted to you, and then there's responsibility that comes with that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. With Firekeeper, I didn't do that. With Land, Water, Sky, I didn't do that. There, like, the chief is in Land, Water, Sky, and everybody knows that's the chief. Like, that's his description. He wears an Oilers hat, his big brown belly, like. And I didn't ask permission, but I didn't think I really had to. And you have to make that call yourself. Like, if I'm writing about, well, somebody that did something in Firekeeper, which I won't name, I'll have to decide whether or not I want to ask them, especially if they're like a perpetrator. Like, I'm not going to ask their permission. But if it's like a friend, I will reach out and be like, is this okay? Can I write this? I usually always do that. If I just use my intuition and I think like, is this something that somebody would be bothered if I took this and ran with it without asking, right?
Yeah. That makes sense. Those sort of ethics.
Yes.
Of story writing. Yeah. There is also a sense that there's an audience for this book. And I'm reminded of Katłıà, who elsewhere sort of refers to her reader as a hopeful accomplice. And so I'm wondering how you address your reader in this book, or who your audience is.
It's probably somebody that doesn't know how to read, honestly, because Nyla doesn't know how to read. And I think it's important that we are writing for people that maybe want to learn or want to know and can't for certain reasons in their life. People that are really, really struggling, that need like something. That's who I wrote it for. Like, I didn't write it for people that don't understand, or people that might have stereotypes of who Nyla is and pigeonhole her or label her or whatever. I wrote it for young girls like Nyla, who don't feel like they have a chance in the world. They don't feel like they could ever do anything or succeed, or because there's a lot of young girls like that in our communities, and it's really sad.
Is there an audio?
I hope so. Well, all of the other ones are.
Yeah.
I tried to do, they asked me to do recording for Northern Flower. Oh, that was the other title, Northern Wildfire. And they were like, no, because you're gonna get that so mixed up with your other book. And I do it all the time, you get them all mixed up. So I tried to record that book. I was in the studio for hours and hours, and they cut it. They're like, no, this is horrible, because my tummy was growling. And it picked up on the mic. So that was a big waste of time and money. But the other two are, and the people that did the audio, they went to great lengths to make sure that they were putting like the proper pronunciations in the language. And I didn't put the language in this one, partly just because like she lost her language, like she didn't know her language, so I just left it out. And it's a lot of work as well, like you have to go through translator and make sure it's correct, and it's just, this book was a bit rushed because I had a double contract, so I had signed a 2-book deal with Fernwood, and then my time was running out, so.
Yeah. I think I was thinking there's so many like land-body connections in the text, which are really beautiful, like due essentially to like the unprecedented effects of settler capitalist greed. You have globally rising temperatures, you have this like sense of like the world is heating up, things are on fire. And then you talk about this evidence of like the fallen trees due to drought, and they're referenced as like drunken trees. And then there's also a scene where, because of the fire raging, there's almost like an ambiguity. Is it like the trees burning? Are they yelling? Or is it Noah yelling? Mm-hmm. And it feels like in those moments, you have those connections. And it feels like kind of warnings to your reader. So I was wondering maybe if you could elaborate on those. They're just such beautiful moments. Where you so easily can conflate the two, as you should, because we're all interconnected.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you see it that way, I'm glad to see it that way. I didn't plan for that. But yeah, I mean, the trees do have, they're beings, they have an entity, and just like humans, maybe they can't talk, but I wanted to portray that. I always try to portray nature in my writing and make sure that it has its own spirit. And it's sort of like the backdrop setting of everything. And what better place than the North? Like, it's so vast and it's so magical. And there are drunken trees right now. Like, there is a big drought up north. That's what the elders and people in the community call them. The permafrost is melted underneath, so there's large patches where it just looks like a giant blew out the birthday candles, where they're all just leaning over. There's a small community that I just came from called Hay River. They might as well call it just the Hay because there's no more river. It dried up. It's just like, I had to write about it, you know, and so I wrote about the big fire that swept through there a few years ago. We thought it was the apocalypse because the sky went dark, and it lined up with what happened last year because Yellowknife evacuated. And so people might be thinking that I'm actually talking about that fire, but that was a fire that already swept through there years before. So it's just something that we are going to have to live through and adapt. And Nyla, that's sort of the turn of events for Nyla, where she's like a pyro, and then all of a sudden she goes to jail for, I don't want to give away too much, but then when she becomes rehabilitated, she goes to community, and then the irony is that they make her be the firekeeper and take care of the fire, and then she starts becoming a forest firefighter, which I also get the inspiration from my son, because my son's a firefighter up north. So I was like asking him all these questions, what it's like being out there. I had no idea what they do to fight those fires. I thought they were using hoses this whole time. He's like, no, we use axes and we use all these kind of tools and chainsaws. And I was like, whoa, I couldn't believe like what he was up to out there. It's scary. On the front lines.
And those scenes are so powerful when you're writing about the earth being so hot, but the fire is coming from underneath, and it's like spurting up in all these different places. It's coming from within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It truly is. Like, the fires are still burning under the snow all year in the north. They haven't gone out. They did like radar sensing, and they're still there. It's so dry.
And there's also other kinds of like really important historical events that are referenced in the book, with the uranium mining and the effects on the Satu Dene, their unknowing participation in the creation of atomic bombs, and the effect of radiation on community members, carcinogenic.
Yeah. And the giant mine, which is like the arsenic.
Yes. Yeah. So there's lots of like fiery material.
If you guys ever watched Oppenheimer yet, the marble part where he like drops the marble, I just couldn't help but think like those were the Dene people that were mining the uranium and the plutonium, and like for each marble it's like one Dene elder gone, because they all like essentially died of cancer. And they didn't put that in the movie though.
No, there's lots they didn't put.
Yeah. I was very disappointed with Oppenheimer because they could have really told the story differently in that regard.
Yeah. Feels like also the cover captures some of that, the fieriness, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the artist and how this was chosen.
Oh my gosh. So I didn't have much of a say either in the cover, and well, I did say that I wanted it to have water and fire, obviously, and I like that it's half and half. But I had no contact with the artist. I had contact with the go-between person, with the publisher.
Okay. Maybe I'll just ask one more question before I open it up to you lovely folks. So you completed a law degree at UVic and you're art acclaimed right now. And so we'd be curious to hear more about how your kind of story responsibilities, whether they converge with your priorities right now as a lawyer, aspiring lawyer.
They totally overlap. Law is writing, it's storying, it's gathering information. So in that way it is, but right now what I'm doing is like solicitation work. I told you earlier, like it's very boring and dry, and I'm just like, I can't wait until I can just do what I want to do. But I'm sort of trying to juggle everything and sort of dropping the ball sometimes because I'm just so busy. But I say that I'm like a full-time writer and a part-time lawyer. Not even sure I really want to be a lawyer at all, but my daughter and some other family members, like Marie, she's like, what are you doing? You went 4 years of law school, you are not practicing, like you're, you know. So there are people that are like, you know, you have to continue on, and of course I'm doing it for me, but I also want to like have my community be proud. And like I'm the first Yellowknife Stunning First Nation lawyer, female lawyer, I think maybe even lawyer at all in our First Nation. I think there's 5,000 of us. And it's sad that I am the first, like I shouldn't be. And I have a friend who's the first Dene doctor, and she says the same thing. She's like, this is wrong, like it's 2024, how come I'm only the first doctor? So, I mean, I'm happy, but at the same time, like, we have a responsibility, I guess, in that way, to like kind of carry the torch and pass it on.
Yeah, there's like a calling that's not entirely your own. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm now in this position where I'm sort of like a sounding board and trying to take that very seriously and like not, you know, not put my foot in my mouth or whatever. Like I don't want to be one of those people in the news like, oh, this person said this or that. I'm so scared of that happening. So I try to walk the good walk and do good and follow the Dene laws and that kind of thing.
That's amazing. Okay, so would anyone like to ask Kat a question? The audience.
And if you have a question, feel free to just put up your hand. Wander over to the microphone.
I recognize some of you. This is like the best crowd yet. I had like a showing where there was like 2 people.
And it's so great to see you in 3D. I loved your reading. And one thing I admire about all of your writing is this deep sense of the importance of female agency. Can you see a little bit connecting sort of your choice to talk about a woman in this particular text who's made some interesting life choices and the advocacy work you're doing for women, girls, and Two-Spirit people in the North? Because it feels like they're connected, and I'd love to just sort of get that fleshed out a little
Yeah, so I mean, you're wanting to know about, sorry, the connection to,
Yeah, so like how is, sorry.
also, I'm getting you to run around now, like a game show host.
How is your decision to frame someone who's an imperfect character, lovable but imperfect, connected to the kind of advocacy work you're doing for women, girls, and two-spirit people in the North? I'm kind of asking the Rosa Parks question, right? Like a lot of times when we're doing advocacy work, we want to center perfect people, and you are not, and I love that, and I want to know more about why you're not.
I mean, yeah, like Nyla doesn't fall into the usual tropes of like, poor me, right? Like, I didn't want to do a victim narrative, like I wanted to stay away from that. There's so much of that already out there that shouldn't be. And I wanted her to be strong despite like everything that she's gone through, and stick up for herself and just not be a victim to what was happening to her, to all of the things that kept on happening. And she was resilient, and in the face of it all, she still like had a good heart, even though like she was not sure if she was a monster for all of the horrible things that she had done. And I like doing that, like even with Land, Water, Sky, the bad guy at the end has his voice and you sort of feel sorry for him. And, you know, like I think it's important, like it's like second chances, I guess. You know, you're not gonna give up on someone just because they did something wrong. And I think like the system really gives up on people and like just leaves them the second they screw up. And that's just not right. Like there needs to be support in place. There needs to be, and not just support in like the sense of like organizational support. There needs to be like family system support. And a lot of our families don't have that because there's such intergenerational trauma. They can literally not support one another at all. So like, where do you find that support? And speaking of support, holy, look who just walked in. Wow, hi guys. This is the APTN crew. These guys are like the APTN board. Come on in. Oh, yay. I was just at APTN all day with these guys. We got the backstage tour of the newsroom and everything. Yeah, I hope that, I mean, I can go on and on, but I had a best friend that went to prison, and she was sort of forgotten about. And I just want to make sure that, like, you know, the bad guy is usually a man too. You don't really often see like a young girl as a bad, like, holy crow, like you always think, oh, young girl's like so polite and nice, and but yeah, so she's just different, and I didn't want to put her in a box.
Were there any other questions?
Mishaps that she goes through are so relatable too, right? Sometimes it's just like letting the fire get out of control, fueling it too much, or
Accidents, yeah.
accidents, yeah. Thanks for the question, Jamie. Any other brave souls?
So you mentioned that you didn't have a lot to say about the title or the front cover. Do you like it?
I
How
do.
do you feel about it?
No, I do. I love it. I love it. I love it more than Land, Water, Sky one, because it felt like really dark, but I guess it sort of suits the book. Yeah, no, I really, they showed me a bunch of different designs, and one of them looked like, do you guys remember that show, The Raccoons? It was like that. It looked like a cartoon. I'm like, no, we're not going there, because they also wanted to sell it as like a coming of age and put it in the youth category, and I didn't think that it was appropriate to do that and to like sort of lead people to think that it was, oh, it's like a cartoon, because it's not. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't be talking to you.
Hi. I'm wondering about writing about issues like this house is not a home book is about housing in this kind of more explicit than usual way that I think allows you to do things that I have never seen done before in a novel. So I really appreciate that. I just wonder how you think about the relationship of these issues, like we're talking about, you know, colonialism, climate change, housing, and how you think about weaving them into a book or making them the central piece of it, or anyway, maybe you'd have something to say about that.
What's your name?
Mel.
Oh my God, okay, hi.
Nice
I
to
knew I
meet you.
recognized you. Okay, now I'm putting a face to a name because we've met online. So the question is, how do I factor in like, sorry.
No, I'm wondering about an issues book, or sometimes issues being woven into books, or it's kind of like the primary thing, like with that, the house is not a home book.
Right.
Just how you think about that.
Yeah, this house is not a home was definitely an issue book. Like the conflict was the housing corporation, it was the bad guy. And this one I didn't really focus too much on that. I think it was more like the internal, like the war within yourself. And but there was obviously like different elements that I brought in, like MMIWG for sure. Housing was also in there. Child welfare is in there. So there are those issues that I did bring in, because I always try to educate as much as possible on why are we where we are? Like, why are Indigenous people where we are today? And it's not as a result of something we've done, it's a result of the system that's failed us. And I think people are still sort of confused about that even now, which just boggles my mind that people still are like, why don't Indians pay taxes, or like, you know, these stupid things. And then it's just like, go do your research and figure it out for yourself. But yeah, I think trying to bring in those elements are important for people that don't understand, because honestly though too, like I didn't understand for a long time why my family was the way we were. Like I had no idea, because we didn't talk about residential school. My mom went to residential school. We did not talk about it. Like it was something that was hidden. And I just always wondered, like, why, you know, why did 3 of my uncles die tragically? Like, that's not normal. So, you know, as an adult, I started doing the work myself to figure it out. Yeah.
Do you have an audience in mind when you're writing a book? Do you think about who you're writing to? And is that an Indigenous audience, a non-Indigenous audience, or anybody? Do you think about that at all when you're writing?
So I used to read a lot when I was young. I don't read as much anymore because I just don't really have time. And honestly, I don't really like fiction that much, weirdly enough. But I wanted to write something that I would enjoy. Like if I were to pick up a book, like I want to see it through. A lot of books these days, I just like, I can't, like, it sucks, it's so bad. But it's held up in the mainstream for some reason, because the mainstream is like this big machine now where it's just pumping out talent that's not even talent, because you have 1 million likes on Instagram, but doesn't mean you can write. So I just wanted to write something that I would enjoy. But also, again, like I always have those young girls in the communities at my, like everything I do, I'm always like, okay, with this young Indigenous girl picking up this book, be able to relate to this. Would it be easy enough for her to read if her reading level comprehension was like grade 6? You know, I didn't want it to be sophisticated and fancy and really long and overdrawn and trying to act really smart and put all these big words in there. And some people have like told me that my books are very simple. And I'm like, good, I like it simple, because I've been told that it's very hard to make things simple. And that's for some writers, if they sort of drab on about being like so smart and trying to use the thesaurus for every single thing, it might mean that you're not really, you know, like, so yeah, I wanted to always just try to keep it easy to read.
And any other questions?
Is it almost time?
If there are no further questions, you folks are welcome to offer any closing comments you might have before we summon Charlie from the Writers Festival work.
Comments, everyone?
No, I probably said everything. I just want to thank everybody again for coming out and taking the time to, you know, listen and care about writing and about story. So thank you, Masicho.
What a beautiful conversation. Thank you. This is a wander around on its own. Here we go. What a warm and inviting conversation. Thank you both for the frankness, for the access to stories that some of us don't know and want to know more, and others know very well and want to see framed out in writing. So very congratulations, Katłįà, on the book. And thank you for sharing with us. And thank you, Mylène, for the hosting a conversation. It's been very, very interesting. One more round of applause. How about? I do especially like the idea about simple, forthright storytelling that invites people in, sort of no matter what their reading competence and experience with the stories is, because stories, we start with stories, you know, everything ultimately is about stories. And when we move toward book writing, sometimes it seems like the core of story, that real urgency that is the narrative, gets a little bit lost. So I think it's really important that we also have stories that are accessible. I want to invite you to a couple of other things that we are doing here in tandem with McNally Robinson, which aside is the best bookstore probably on the planet. And John, who is hiding back like the Wizard of Oz back here, is possibly the most organized event planner also on the planet. So since this becomes a home for lots of us who love books and love to encounter writers, I invite you to give them a thunderous round of applause. I invite you back on Sunday afternoon. We are going to be having 12 poets up here reading new poems, original poems written for Winnipeg 150. Because this is our 150th anniversary this year. Ariel Gordon is the queen of this project, Rites of Spring, and Julian Day is her co-editor, and they received all sorts of submissions for this project and have 12 poets, selected 12 poets who are going to be in tomorrow's free press. This might be the only big newspaper in the country that has a whole poetry section, because like what? So those poets will be here, and it's always a big crowd and highly entertaining. So that's Sunday afternoon, so we're the 28th at 2. And then spinning forward by a month on Thursday, May 23rd, we're very excited to welcome back Billy Ray Belcourt with the short story collection Coexistence. Billy Ray is one of the most extraordinary voices writing in Canada right now, I believe. And he'll be in conversation with Katłįà Vermette. So I invite you to that as well. One more thanks to Roseway Fernwood for making this evening possible. And it looks like I think the next step is we safely get Katłıà over to this table, which shouldn't be too hard. And then you can come forward and get books signed. The rule here is though, you have to pay for the book before you leave the store. You just do it like that. Thank you so much for coming, and please one more round of applause for our readers.